A powerful man thinks he's won when he mocks a girl from the wrong side of the lab. But what happens when the tables turn in front of the entire industry? Let us know in the comments section below. They didn't expect much from Valerie Friedkin. She was the quiet girl with oil-stained jeans and hand-me-down notebooks, drifting like a shadow through the towering corridors of NovaDyn Labs. Nobody ever asked her why she stayed so late after school, or what she scribbled in those notebooks while waiting for her father to finish wiping down executive offices. But if they had, they might have noticed the equations she solved for fun. Equations most of their top engineers couldn't even read. Valerie had grown used to being invisible. She wore it like a coat, buttoned up to the collar. While other girls spent their weekends on TikTok or at the mall, Valerie studied torque curves and heat dissipation thresholds. She learned by listening, watching, memorizing engine blueprints from discarded presentation folders, copying whiteboard formulas when no one was looking. At 17, she understood combustion mapping better than most interns. Not that anyone cared. She was just Valerie Friedkin's daughter, the janitor's girl. But upstairs, 17 floors above the maintenance closet where Valerie stored her things, Derek Langston did care. Not about Valerie, of course. Derek didn't even know her name. What he cared about was the engine. The engine, the multi-billion-dollar prototype that had turned NovaDyn from a quiet innovator into the whispered name on every defense contractor's lips. And it wouldn't start. Langston stood in the middle of the glass-walled conference room, his jaw tight. Around him sat a semicircle of top brass and military advisors, their faces caught in that tense expression between curiosity and contempt. Derek hated that look. He was used to admiration, fear, deference. But today he was offering excuses, and they were beginning to rot in the air. Maybe if we extend the thermal buffer window, his chief engineer, Kyle Renner, offered weakly. Langston cut him off with a glare sharp enough to strip paint. We've had 2 years. You had $500 million, and a thermal buffer window is what you've got for me? Kyle blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. Someone across the table cleared their throat. Langston turned toward the silent man in uniform sitting to his left. Colonel Stratham, Air Defense Command. His expression unreadable, like the kind of face carved into monuments. Colonel, Langston said, voice lowered, we are 90% there. The base algorithm is solid, and our torque-to-thrust ratio? I'm not here for 90%, Stratham replied coolly. I'm here for performance, the kind that gets our pilots home alive. Silence. The room sat in a vacuum of expectation, where only one thing was clear. If that engine didn't fire soon, funding would vanish, and NovaDyn with it. Langston glanced out the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. From this high up, even the employees looked like specks. Workers clocked out below, streaming into the parking lot like ants. Then, out of habit, his eyes landed on the one figure he always seemed to notice at the end of the day. That girl again. There she was, leaning against a bench near the loading dock, legs crossed, notebook in hand, her hair tied back in a knot, pencil between her teeth. Langston narrowed his eyes. He'd seen her before. She was always there, quiet, still, watching. Something about her irritated him. Not because she didn't belong, she clearly didn't, but because she seemed like she did. Who is that? He muttered. Kyle followed his gaze. Who? Girl. Down near the loading dock. The one always hanging around. Kyle squinted, then shrugged. Oh, that's Friedkin's kid. Langston turned. Friedkin? The janitor, works night shifts. That's his daughter, I think. Langston scoffed. Brilliant. We're bleeding millions while janitors bring their kids to work. She just waits for him, I think. Doesn't cause trouble. Langston said nothing for a long moment. His brain was already firing on a darker wavelength. Frustration, had a way of sharpening his cruelty. "Let's shake things up," he said finally. "If our engineers can't fix it, maybe it's time someone else took a crack." Kyle blinked. "Sir?" Langston didn't respond. He was already reaching for the building's intercom system, tapping into the main channel with the same confidence he used to close billion-dollar deals. "Attention all staff," his voice rang out through the building, slick and cold. "Effective immediately, I'm inviting Valerie Friedkin, daughter of maintenance worker Eli Friedkin, to the executive floor. I've heard she knows a thing or two about engines." The silence that followed felt like gravity collapsing. Downstairs, Valerie froze. The pencil dropped from her mouth and clattered on the concrete. Eyes turned. Security radios clicked to life. She hadn't even known he knew her name. But everyone did now. Valerie didn't move at first. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the loading dock, as if someone had hit pause on the entire world. The radio buzzed again behind her, one of the security guards mumbling something she couldn't hear over the sudden rush of blood in her ears. Her face was hot. Her fingers tingled. She looked down at her notebook. Open equations stared back at her like traitors. The intercom clicked off. Then, footsteps. "Valerie," came a soft voice. "That was you, right?" It was Marcus, a junior tech who sometimes brought her spare parts from the trash bins. He looked pale, holding the door open like he wasn't sure whether to congratulate her or call her an ambulance. "Come on, you better go." Valerie rose on legs that felt boneless, the notebook clutched to her chest. She walked through the door, past rows of blinking server towers and humming vents, following Marcus down a corridor she'd never been allowed to enter. The carpet here was cleaner, the lighting warmer. People actually looked up from their desks when she passed, not like the sub-basement, where she spent her time among mop buckets and unused blueprints. She didn't speak until the elevator doors slid shut behind them. "How is he doing this?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then, "He's pissed about the engine, about the meeting. Maybe he wants to embarrass someone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he just noticed you." Valerie gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, sure." They didn't talk again. Floor numbers lit up one by one. 13, 14. By the time the doors opened on the 17th floor, she'd rehearsed 1,000 possible outcomes. Most of them ended with her crying in an elevator. A few ended with her expelled from the building entirely. None of them included what actually happened next. She stepped out into silence. An entire conference room of executives. Men in suits, women in sharp jackets, military advisors in dark green uniforms turned to face her. The room had an aquarium-like quality, all that glass, all those eyes. At the head of the table, Derek Langston smiled. "Miss Friedkin," he said smoothly, standing. "So good of you to join us." Valerie blinked. She'd seen him before in magazines, on stage at tech expos, always surrounded by people, always shaking hands, but up close he looked more like a weapon than a CEO. Handsome in a polished, steel-plated way, sharp edges and no warmth. Hi," she said, her voice cracking like glass. "Come in, don't be shy." He gestured to the chair beside Kyle, who looked like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. "We've been having a technical discussion about something that might be in your wheelhouse." Valerie looked from one face to the next, trying to keep her spine straight as she stepped inside. Her father had always taught her that people in power count on you folding first. Don't give them that. Don't ever give them that. "I'm not sure why I'm here," she said, carefully setting her notebook on the table but not sitting. "I don't work for you." Langston's smile widened. "No, you don't, but you do spend an impressive amount of time observing our work, enough that I figured, hey, Maybe the janitor's daughter has a miracle up her sleeve. Do you? There it was. The smirk behind the charm. The condescension polished to a high corporate gloss. Valerie didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. Instead, she lifted her chin and opened her notebook, flipping past the doodles and sketches to a half-solved schematic she'd copied last week. "I don't believe in miracles," she said quietly. "But I do think your exhaust reclamation loop is misaligned by 6 degrees. If you're running closed-cycle ignition, the heat distortion would create microfractures along the outer casing, which might be why your thermal regulation fails after 3 seconds. A long beat of silence. Kyle Rinna's mouth actually dropped open. Langston blinked. Once, then twice. "Excuse me?" She turned the notebook around, pointing at the sketch. "Right here. Your Phase 3 model uses a spiral core, right? That design creates turbulence in the intake chamber. If your math assumes symmetrical flow, that's your first problem." The silence deepened, then shattered when one of the military engineers leaned forward, squinting at the page. "She's not wrong," he muttered. "That loop would destabilize the heat barrier." Valerie didn't allow herself to smile. She just looked back at Langston, steady as stone. "I'm not saying I can fix it," she added, "but I can tell you why it's broken." Langston studied her for a long time. Then, to everyone's shock, including his own, he laughed. "Well, damn," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The janitor's kid actually has teeth." "Sir," Kyle interjected, "this isn't—" No. Let her try. Let's see if our brilliant engineers can handle being shown up by a high schooler." Kyle's face tightened, but he said nothing. Langston turned back to Valerie, eyes gleaming. "You've got 1 week," he said. "We're going public at the Future Tech Summit. If that engine doesn't fire by then, we're done. If you want to take a crack, be my guest." She hesitated. "And if I say no?" His smile dropped. "I don't recall offering a choice." Valerie stared at him. Then she sat down. Across the table, no one moved. Even the colonel raised an eyebrow, as if wondering whether they'd all just witnessed the start of something they weren't ready for. Valerie flipped to a new page, picked up her pencil, and started to draw. Valerie's fingers moved like they had their own memory. Each mark on the paper, each calculation, had purpose. Her pencil scraped against the notebook page as she translated intuition into numbers, rough sketches into layered diagrams. For a moment, the weight of the glass walls, the watching eyes, even Langston's dare melted away. This was her world now, the one she built in silence and shadows under flickering utility lights while her father mopped up other people's footprints. But outside the page, chaos was brewing. The next morning, NovaDyn buzzed like a hive poked with a stick. Word spread fast. The CEO had challenged the janitor's daughter to fix the impossible engine. It sounded like a joke. Some whispered it was a publicity stunt. Others said it was Langston's way of blaming someone else when the company finally collapsed. Still, no one could ignore what happened in that conference room. By noon, Valerie had a badge. By 2, a temporary workstation. By the end of the day, half the engineering staff refused to make eye contact with her. She didn't care, or she was too busy trying to save the engine. Valerie moved through the lab with quiet determination. She spent hours hunched over the prototype core, not touching it first, just watching, listening. The engine didn't speak like people did, but she could hear it anyway. The hiss of resistance in the fuel line, the stuttered breath of its failed ignition, the cold anger in every piece that had been forced to work before it was ready. It wasn't just broken. It was misused, abused, sabotaged. She just didn't know why, yet. In the corner of the lab, Mira Chen watched silently. NovaDyn's lead mechanical systems engineer, Mira had kept her distance during the meeting. Now she observed Valerie the way one predator might assess another, calculating, cautious, curious. Late in the evening, when most of the engineers had filtered out, Mira approached. "You work like someone with something to prove," she said softly. Valerie didn't look up. "I do. That's not always a good thing in this place. Neither is being right." Mira paused, then let out a quiet laugh. "Fair point." She leaned in, peering over Valerie's shoulder at the notes scattered across the desk. Equations, fuel maps, resonance charts, all done by hand. No calculators, no modeling software. Just logic and raw understanding. "I've seen those designs before," Mira said, pointing to one of the older diagrams. "But they were pulled from the system a few months back." Valerie glanced at her. "Why?" Mira hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "There was an engineer named Javier Ramos. Brilliant. Thought outside the box. Too much, maybe. He raised concerns about the prototype, said someone was forcing revisions that didn't make sense. He died in a car accident 2 months ago." Valerie's hand froze. "Do you think it was really an accident?" "I think," Mira said carefully. NovaDyn stopped asking questions the moment it became inconvenient. That night, Valerie didn't go home. She curled up in a corner of the diagnostics bay, notebook pressed to her chest, the hum of cooling fans lulling her to sleep. Her father, Eli, found her there during his shift change. He didn't wake her, just laid his coat over her shoulders, stared at her a long time, then turned away, mop in hand. The next morning, everything changed. Kyle Renner showed up with 2 interns, arms crossed, eyes cold. "We need the engine back," he said, loud enough for everyone in the lab to hear. Valerie stood slowly. "I still have 4 days. This isn't a game, Friedkin. You're risking millions in hardware. You're not even on payroll." Langston's voice came from behind them like a blade. "He stays." Everyone turned. The CEO stood at the edge of the lab, crisp suit immaculate, face unreadable. "I said a week," Langston continued. "She gets a week." Kyle gritted his teeth. "Sir, this is highly—" Langston didn't wait for him to finish. "And I want regular updates. From her." He turned and left as fast as he came. Mira let out a slow breath. "You've made a fan." "I doubt it," Valerie muttered. "He's waiting for me to fail." Mira smiled faintly. Then together they began to strip the engine. Layer by layer they peeled back what previous teams had bolted down in desperation. Valerie mapped inconsistencies, Mira ran diagnostics. By the second day, they'd isolated the primary failure point. By the third, they had a temporary patch running simulations at 86% stability. It wasn't perfect, but it was proof. And proof was dangerous? That night, someone broke into the diagnostics bay. When Valerie arrived early the next morning, the patch had been deleted from the system. Her notebooks gone, backup logs wiped. Her hands shook. She stared at the empty desk, then sank to the floor. The first time, doubt crept in, but Mira appeared behind her, holding something tight to her chest. "I made copies," she whispered. Valerie looked up. Mira handed over a flash drive and a worn folder stuffed with copies of her handwritten notes. "I've been here a long time," she said. "I've seen what this place does to people like us. You're not going to be one of them." Valerie clutched the folder and stood up. If they wanted to bury the truth, they'd have to try harder. Because now she wasn't just fixing an engine. She was about to expose everything. The Future Tech Summit was a circus of power suits, synthetic smiles, and endless camera flashes. Tech giants displayed prototypes on floating screens while investors hovered like vultures, scenting the next unicorn. Among them, NovaDyn's booth was a fortress of polished chrome and military precision, flanked by 2 armed guards and a roped-off stage. Valerie stood behind the curtain, sweat prickling beneath her collar. Her jumpsuit wasn't tailored, her boots had grease stains, but around her neck hung a simple chain, her father's old dog tags from his days in the Navy, She wore them like armor. In her hand was the flash drive Mira had protected with her life. The engine, rebuilt and fully stabilized, gleamed under the stage lights. It was smaller than it looked on the diagrams, more elegant. It didn't just represent a breakthrough in propulsion. It represented every person who had been told no, but did it anyway. Valerie had poured herself into that machine, and it was time to light it up. Behind her, Mira appeared, holding a wireless mic. "You ready?" Valerie didn't answer right away. "What if it doesn't work?" she finally whispered. Mira smiled. "Then we fail loud." Langston approached from the wings, flanked by two men in tailored suits and identical hollow stares. He looked Valerie up and down like a manager inspecting a factory part. "Don't embarrass us," he said flatly. "This room has 6 generals and 3 senators. You're not just carrying our reputation, you're carrying mine." Valerie looked him dead in the eye. "Then you shouldn't have dared me." The spotlight clicked on. She stepped forward into the roar of clapping, not for her, but for the brand she represented. A polished voice introduced NovaDyn's next-generation engine. A brief flash of Langston's rehearsed smile lit up the jumbotron. But it was Valerie who moved to the controls. She said nothing, no long-winded speech, just 3 words into the mic. "Let's begin." Then, the engine's interface blinked to life. She powered up the core. Purring filled the stage, followed by a sharp rising hum that climbed like a violin string tightening. People in the crowd leaned forward. Something felt different. Cleaner. Sharper. Then, with a single deep pulse, the engine ignited. No smoke. No shudder. Just power. Steady. Controlled. Alive. The room exploded in applause. Cameras flashed. Someone yelled, "Holy hell, it works!" Langston stepped forward to bask in the moment, his voice prepped to take credit. But Valerie turned first, raising the mic again. "This design isn't just efficient, it's corrective." A hush fell. She didn't smile. 2 months ago, an engineer named Javier Ramos was forced off this project for pointing out that the original specs were flawed. He died in a car accident after reporting irregularities in the thermal structure. His logs were deleted. His name was scrubbed from the files. Gasps rippled through the audience. Langston's eyes narrowed, sharp and dangerous. Valerie continued, "I recovered his data, and with help from Mira Chen, someone this company refused to listen to, I rebuilt the system the right way, without theft, without shortcuts, and without sacrificing people's lives." One of the generals leaned over to whisper something to a staffer. Phones lit up. Whispers turned to murmurs. Langston lunged forward to take the mic, but Valerie stepped back. She held up the flash drive. "This is everything," she said. "Not just the corrected blueprint, but the internal memos, pressure reports, and audit logs. I've already sent copies to regulatory agencies and the press. The rest of you can judge for yourselves." She walked off the stage. Langston didn't follow. He couldn't. Not with the cameras turning on him, the crowd's cheers twisting into questions. Backstage, Mira caught Valerie in a hug so tight it knocked the air from her lungs. "You did it," she whispered. Valerie exhaled. Her hands were shaking. But she felt light, like someone had peeled off the weight she didn't even know she'd been carrying. Later, reporters crowded around her. She answered calmly. She gave credit where it was due. Her father stood beside her, speechless but proud, wiping tears with a folded handkerchief as microphones pointed in every direction. Langston was escorted from the building 2 days later under federal investigation. NovaDyn collapsed within a month. But Valerie didn't. She rose. 3 weeks after the summit, she declined every scholarship she was offered. Instead, she launched her own company, Torchline Dynamics, a startup committed to clean propulsion, open-source transparency, and equitable engineering opportunities for underrepresented youth. Her first hire was Mira. Her second, a quiet teenage coder from Baltimore who'd never seen the inside of a lab before. She didn't build a throne. She built a bridge. Her father retired from janitorial work. He now gave guest lectures at schools and community centers, talking not about loss or struggle, but legacy, one he lived to see. And as for Valerie, she wore her oil-stained boots in every board meeting. She kept the dog tags around her neck, and when people asked her how she did it, she only ever said one thing: "He shouldn't have dared me."